In the autumn of 1889, 5 men disappeared from a secluded Shaker commune in the Ohio Valley without a single trace of their departure through the muddy, rain-swept paths. Their spiritual leader, Sister Agatha Poole, testified they had been called away to establish a new community in the West, a perilous undertaking during the territory's most devastating flood season on record. For over 70 years, the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing kept the event sealed within their confidential records until restoration crews repairing an old worship hall in 1961 uncovered evidence that would compel the elders to confront the most harrowing episode of their early Ohio history. What they found concealed within the hall's subfloor would test the community's deepest convictions about piety, brotherhood, and the cost of creating heaven on earth. Before we continue with the account of Sister Agatha and the autumn that reshaped their world, this channel is not for the faint of heart, but for those with the courage to unearth the enigmas that time has sought to hide. If you are prepared to hear tales that will make you question the accepted narratives of America's spiritual past, click subscribe and turn on notifications. Let me know in the comments, what region are you listening from? Are you steadfast enough to learn the truth about the early Shaker settlements? Let's discover it as one. The revelation in 1961 would confirm that some secrets are too dreadful to remain interred indefinitely. The Ohio Territory of 1810 was a landscape of profound devotion and severe hardship. When Mother and Lee's disciples first arrived in the lush river valley, they saw it as a sanctuary, a place where they could live their faith in communal perfection, free from the persecution that had hounded them from New York and New England. Their isolation was both a shield and a trial. Sister Agatha Poole came to the valley with a small contingent of believers in the spring of 1811. She was 41 years of age, a gifted weaver from Pennsylvania who had joined the Shakers in 1805, drawn by their tenets of celibacy, equality, and communal living. What distinguished Sister Agatha from many of her sisters was her charge. She was the spiritual head of a household of 5 brethren, all of whom had sworn vows of celibacy and devotion under her guidance. The eldest, Brother Thomas, was 39, a quiet, sturdy man who had been with Agatha for a decade. He was a master carpenter, his hands skilled at shaping wood for the community's expanding structures. Next was Brother William, 32, an educated man who could read Latin and Greek. He often questioned their practices with an intellectual rigor that made others uneasy, yet Agatha valued his mind. Brother Samuel, 28, had joined just before their journey west. He was a gifted herbalist, though he suffered from a chronic lung condition that worsened in the damp river air. His own family had perished in a fire in Kentucky, leaving him with no kin but the society. The 2 youngest were brothers David and Elijah, aged 20 and 19. They had been placed in Agatha's care by the elders after their family was lost to cholera in an eastern city, needing the structure and protection of the Shaker family. The Poole household settled in an area that would later be called Harmony Creek, some 10 miles northeast of the main village. Agatha selected the spot for its reliable spring and fertile soil, promising for their orchards and gardens. More critically, the seclusion matched her contemplative nature. She was a woman of intense private devotion who preferred the rhythm of work and prayer with her brethren to the constant social interchange of the central community. That first summer, the brethren labored with determined fervor to prepare for the coming winter. They erected a large, timber-frame dwelling with separate sleeping quarters for each, adhering to the strict separation of the sexes that defined Shaker life. The dwelling was soundly built, with a stone cellar and a sturdy shake roof, but it stood alone amidst the wilderness. Their closest neighbors were a family of German immigrants living 2 miles to the south, and they would be entirely cut off once the autumn rains swelled the creeks and rivers. The Shaker community in those foundational years was interdependent by necessity. Every family's survival hinged on shared labor, pooled resources, and mutual aid. The elders maintained vigilant oversight, not only for theological purity but because they understood the psychological strains of their austere, isolated existence. Leaders like Sister Agatha were expected to maintain harmony and productivity within their households. The brethren each brought distinct talents to their remote home. Thomas managed their agricultural and construction projects with quiet competence. William kept their accounts and records, and had begun studying medicinal texts to supplement Samuel's knowledge of herbs. Samuel, despite his infirmity, was a genius at preserving food, creating stores of dried meats, vegetables, and medicinal tinctures. David and Elijah, the youngest, were vigorous and optimistic, undertaking the most strenuous physical labor with unwavering dedication. By October 1889, the Poole household appeared to be a model of Shaker virtue. Community records indicate that Agatha made regular trips to the main village for meetings and trade. Her brethren were described by visitors as healthy, well-fed, and remarkably unified. Elder Josiah Clark, who visited the dwelling in early October, later wrote in a community journal that the Poole family seemed blessed with uncommon peace and prosperity, a testament to righteous living and orderly discipline. What Elder Clark did not record in the official log, but confided to his personal diary, was a detail that troubled him. The 5 men moved with an almost preternatural synchronicity, their actions so coordinated it was as if a single will animated 5 bodies. He noted they all had similar, faint scars on the backs of their hands, small, precise marks they attributed to workshop accidents, yet all appearing to be of identical shape and age. The autumn of 1889 was one of relentless rain, even for Ohio. The deluge began in mid-September and continued with little respite through November. The rivers overflowed, turning the valley into a quagmire and isolating outlying families like the Pooles. For those in the main village, the season was difficult but endurable. For the isolated, it was a trial of preparation, faith, and fortitude. The last confirmed sighting of all 5 Poole brethren together was on October 12, 1889, when a group of men from the main village passed by the dwelling while checking animal traps. They reported seeing lamplight in the windows and spoke briefly with Thomas and William, who came to the door to accept a gift of fresh-caught fish. The men thanked them courteously but declined an invitation to send someone back for an upcoming worship service, stating they planned to hold their own private devotions. What transpired next would baffle investigators for generations and create the most enduring mystery in early Shaker, Ohio history. The first indication of trouble came on November 5, 1889, when Sister Agatha appeared at the main village requesting a private audience with Elder Clark. Those who saw her that day described a woman who seemed to have aged a decade in a few short weeks. Her habit was mud-spattered, her cap askew, and her eyes held what one witness termed the gaze of one who has witnessed things beyond mortal ken. In the privacy of the elder's study, Agatha explained that Brother Thomas had received a divine communication directing him to travel west to aid a nascent Shaker community in Indiana. She said the calling had been so powerful he could not wait for the floods to recede and had departed with a small band of itinerant preachers passing through their area. Elder Clark was instantly doubtful. No travelers would attempt a westward journey in such conditions, and Thomas had never spoken of any Shaker community in Indiana. When the elder pressed for details, Agatha's story began to waver. First, she said the travelers were revivalists. Then she claimed they were traders who knew hidden paths through the swamps. Her hands shook as she spoke, and she repeatedly glanced toward the window as if anticipating an arrival. Most disquieting was her insistence that the elder should not visit the dwelling to check on the remaining brethren, claiming they were observing a period of intense spiritual cleansing that demanded absolute seclusion. Elder Clark recorded the conversation in the community ledger, but his private diary reveals his mounting dread. He wrote, "Sister Agatha speaks of visions, but I fear she may be hiding something far more worldly and awful. Her demeanor suggests not grief, but culpability, and her accounts defy both reason and the season. 3 weeks later, on November 28, Agatha returned to the village with an even more unsettling report. William, she claimed, had also received a calling to travel west, this time to serve as a scribe for a distant congregation. He had left with another group of wayfarers, taking only essential provisions. The elder demanded to know what sort of wayfarers could be moving through the Ohio Territory in December, and Agatha's response was disjointed and incoherent, filled with allusions to God's inscrutable designs and trials of the Spirit. This time, Elder Clark insisted on visiting the dwelling to speak with the remaining brethren. Agatha grew agitated, claiming that Samuel, David, and Elijah were too ill with a swamp fever to receive visitors. She promised to bring them to the village as soon as they recuperated. But the elder's suspicions had solidified. On December 2, Elder Clark organized a party of 4 men to journey to the Poole dwelling. The trek through the flooded landscape was arduous, taking the better part of a day. When they arrived, they found Agatha alone, sitting by a hearth that seemed too small to warm the vast structure. She greeted them with anxious formality, but her explanations about the brethren's whereabouts had altered once more. Now, she asserted that Samuel, David, and Elijah had recovered and decided to join Thomas and William in the west. She said they had departed just 3 days prior, guided by a party of rivermen who promised them safe passage. The elder asked to see the men's personal effects. Agatha showed them several chambers that appeared to have been emptied in haste. Clothing, tools, and personal items were gone. But the elder observed that heavy items like furniture and woodworking tools remained, which was unusual for men making a permanent relocation. More alarming were the signs of recent excavation in the sodden ground behind the dwelling. Agatha explained she had been deepening the root cellar, preparing for the next season's harvest, but the earth was waterlogged, and the extent of the disturbed soil seemed excessive for a simple storage pit. When one of the men commented on the futility of such labor in the flooded conditions, Agatha's retort was sharp and defensive, stating that God's work demands perseverance even in the most adverse circumstances. The visiting party stayed the night, and several later reported feeling profoundly unsettled. The building was eerily silent, they said, devoid of the subtle noises of male industry, no rasp of saws, no murmur of study, no sounds of labor. Agatha served them a meal consisting solely of preserved goods, though fresh bread and dairy should have been available if the brethren had been managing the household until recently. Most haunting was an incident that occurred in the night. Robert Hayes, one of the visiting men, was awakened by what he described as a low, mournful chanting, faint but clear, seeming to emanate from beneath the floorboards. When he mentioned it at dawn, the others dismissed it as the wind or the creaking of the structure, but Hayes remained certain he had heard human voices in solemn unison. Elder Clark's party departed the next morning with more questions than answers. In his private journal, he wrote, "I fear Sister Agatha may have committed deeds that will bring disgrace upon our society and our principles. The isolation of the flood season can drive souls to desperate acts, and I worry that the rigors of our celibate, communal life may have proven too severe for her spirit to withstand." However, the elder faced a quandary. The Shaker community was already viewed with suspicion by outsiders. Rumors of violence or fanaticism could bring unwanted scrutiny from state authorities. Their practice of celibacy and communal property was controversial enough, and any scandal could be used to justify legal action against them. After consulting with other elders, Clark decided to monitor the situation discreetly, hoping the spring thaw would bring a resolution to the mystery. Throughout the remaining winter months, Agatha made regular appearances at the village, always alone and increasingly gaunt. She claimed to be receiving letters from the brethren, confirming their safe arrival and contentment in their new roles, but she could never produce these letters, stating they were too sacred to share or had been damaged by moisture. Members of the community began to whisper. Some believed Agatha had indeed sent the men away, perhaps because she could no longer provide for them, or because tensions in the household had become intolerable. Others suspected something far more sinister, pointing to her erratic behavior and the contradictions in her narratives. The truth would remain concealed until the spring thaw revealed secrets that would challenge everything the community believed about devotion, brotherhood, and the price of survival in the wilderness. When the waters receded in April 1890, Elder Clark finally had the chance to conduct a thorough examination of the Poole property. What he found there would torment him for his remaining days and forge a mystery that would endure for over 70 years. The dwelling itself appeared to have been abandoned for weeks. Dust coated the surfaces, and the rooms that had belonged to the 5 brethren showed signs of frantic cleaning rather than orderly departure. More significantly, the elder discovered several items that contradicted Agatha's claims of a voluntary exodus. William's most prized possession, a vellum-bound journal of his theological musings, was hidden beneath a floorboard in his room. The final entry, dated October 13, 1889, was scrawled in a trembling script and contained a single, cryptic line, "Says we must all offer the ultimate testament for the sake of the perfected community, but I fear her visions spring from a darker well than heaven." Behind the dwelling, the area Agatha claimed to be excavating for a root cellar told a different story. The disturbed earth covered a much larger area than needed, and the digging appeared to have been done in stages over many weeks. Most damning was what the elder found partially submerged in the muck, fragments of cloth matching descriptions of the brethren's habits, along with personal items including a silver pendant Thomas had worn since his youth. The elder also discovered evidence of what seemed to be ritualistic activity. In a cleared space near the dig site, he found the remains of several small fires arranged in a deliberate pattern. Mixed with the ashes were charred fragments of paper that appeared to be pages from religious texts, though not from standard Shaker publications. Some legible pieces contained references to purification through self-annihilation and perfect unity through willing surrender, concepts that existed in Shaker theology but were being interpreted in ways that horrified the elder. Further evidence came from the dwelling's interior. In Agatha's private chamber, the elder found a hidden compartment containing several notebooks filled with her handwriting. The entries documented her growing fixation on what she termed the principle of perfect oblation, a belief that God required the most faithful to surrender their very lives to achieve a state of sinless perfection. The notebooks revealed Agatha had been studying esoteric spiritualist texts and had come to believe her household had been chosen for a sacred mission requiring the ultimate sacrifice. The final entries described Agatha's growing certainty that the brethren had been sent to her specifically to fulfill this divine purpose. She wrote of receiving visions that showed her the glorious unity awaiting communities that proved their absolute devotion through self-sacrifice. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic, and the later pages contained disturbing allusions to the joyful surrender of the self and the binding power of spilled blood. Elder Clark faced an impossible situation. The evidence strongly indicated that Agatha had murdered her 5 brethren, likely as part of a distorted religious rite. But Agatha herself had vanished without a trace, leaving no clue to her whereabouts. His attempts to find her proved futile. She had simply disappeared into the vast American frontier. The Shaker leadership made the difficult decision to classify the entire incident. They were acutely aware that any public disclosure would fuel anti-Shaker sentiment and could trigger state intervention. The official records were sealed, and the few men who knew the truth were sworn to secrecy. The Poole dwelling was quietly dismantled, and the disturbed earth was carefully restored. The society purchased the property and designated it unsuitable for settlement. The 5 brethren were officially listed as having relocated to unknown Western communities, their disappearance explained as a collective decision. But secrets persist, especially in close-knit communities. Over the years, whispered tales circulated about the autumn when 5 men vanished, and one woman's faith led her to commit monstrous acts. Some versions claimed Agatha had been driven mad by isolation and religious mania. Others suggested she had discovered a dark truth in the isolated valley that demanded a terrible toll. The most persistent rumors claimed the brethren had been willing participants, convinced by their leaders' claims of divine revelation that their sacrifice was necessary for the community's spiritual perfection. As decades passed, the area around the former Poole property gained a reputation for strange phenomena. Travelers reported feeling an unsettling presence, and some claimed to hear the sound of male voices chanting on the wind, especially during the autumn rains. The mystery might have remained buried forever if not for the society's need to renovate its aging structures. In 1961, more than 70 years after the disappearances, the elders decided to restore the original Harmony Creek Worship Hall. The site was chosen for its historical significance, with no knowledge of the darkness that lay beneath its foundations. What the restoration crew discovered would force the society to confront the truth about one of its most carefully guarded secrets and reveal that the autumn of 1889 had been even more terrible than the darkest rumors had suggested. The restoration of the old Harmony Creek Hall began on a cool September morning in 1961. The project foreman, Brother Micah Stevens, was a lifelong Shaker who had heard the old stories about the Poole property but dismissed them as folklore. The crew began work on the foundation on September 18. For the first 2 days, they found nothing unusual. On the third day, about 3 feet down, they uncovered a deliberately constructed stone crypt, roughly 6 feet by 6 feet, sealed with a heavy slate slab. When they lifted it, they found a collection of objects placed there with clear intention. The objects included 5 sets of men's Shaker habits, neatly folded and arranged in separate piles. Each set contained a coat, trousers, undergarments, shoes, and personal items like writing kits and shaving tools. Most significantly, each pile held a small oilskin pouch containing identification papers and personal letters that unmistakably belonged to Thomas, William, Samuel, David, and Elijah Poole. The preservation was remarkable, protected by the stone and the dry soil. Brother Micah immediately contacted Elder Rebecca Carter, the current leader of the Harmony Creek family. Elder Carter, unfamiliar with the old incident, recognized its gravity and contacted the Central Shaker leadership. Within hours, a team arrived led by Elder Abraham Wright, a senior trustee with access to the Society's confidential archives. Elder Wright's examination of the documents confirmed the worst fears. The papers included letters written by each of the 5 brethren, apparently composed just before their deaths, intended as final testaments. The letters were haunting in their acceptance of what they described as their calling to achieve perfect unity through self-sacrifice. Thomas's letter, in his steady script, expressed humility at being chosen for the great work that would bind their spiritual family for eternity. William's was more theological, referencing obscure doctrines and his belief that the surrender of the physical self would open the gates to a higher plane of existence. Samuel's was the most poignant, speaking of his chronic illness as a symbol of mortal imperfection and his hope that his sacrifice would purify their community. David and Elijah's letters were shorter, filled with expressions of brotherly love and faith in the path set before them. The letters made it devastatingly clear the 5 men had not been murdered against their will but had participated willingly in what they believed was a sacred ordinance. Elder Wright immediately halted the restoration and had the Society's historical department locate the sealed Poole files. What they found painted a more complete, and more troubling, picture. The files contained Elder Clark's full notes, including details of a discovered correspondence that suggested the Poole tragedy was not isolated. References in Agatha's notebooks mentioned communication with other Shaker leaders who had received similar revelations. Most chilling was a letter intercepted in 1891, addressed to Agatha at a remote address in Illinois, signed only with the initials, J.B., containing coded references to the completed labor and the pattern revealed. This evidence suggested Agatha had not acted alone but was part of a secret faction within the early Shaker community that had developed an extremist interpretation of their doctrine. This faction apparently believed the ultimate expression of faith required the sacrifice of community members, guaranteeing their collective salvation. Elder Wright's team began a careful review of early records, uncovering a pattern of unexplained disappearances and family tragedies scattered across early Shaker settlements. Between 1885 and 1895, at least 8 Shaker families reported members departing for Western missions under circumstances mirroring the Poole case. Viewed together, they suggested a coordinated effort by a secret group carrying out what they deemed sacred self-sacrifices. The victims were often the young and devout, and the instigators were respected leaders. The investigation revealed this group had developed an elaborate theological framework, drawing on the most austere Shaker principles to justify their actions. They saw themselves as pioneers of a higher law of devotion. Elder Wright's team realized they were uncovering evidence of a systematic conspiracy that had operated within the early Shaker society. The implications for the community's legacy and the faith of its members were profound. The decision on how to proceed rested with the society's highest council. The meeting took place on October 10, 1961. Elder Wright presented his findings. The evidence was incontrovertible. The stone crypt, the preserved letters, all pointed to a secret faction responsible for multiple deaths. The council's decision was unanimous but heavy-hearted. The evidence would be preserved in the society's most secure archives, accessible only to the highest leadership. The victims would be remembered in private, solemn ceremonies. But the full truth would not be revealed to the public or the wider Shaker membership. Justification was found in the need to protect the living community from scandal and to prevent the desecration of the victim's memory by sensationalism. The Harmony Creek restoration site was quietly shifted to a different part of the foundation, and the crypt was sealed permanently with concrete. The letters and artifacts were transported to a secure vault. Brother Micah and the others involved were reassigned and swore oaths of silence. The official reason for the change in restoration plans was cited as unforeseen structural issues. The hall was restored 6 months later and stands to this day, its congregation unaware of the tragedy discovered and concealed beneath its floor. But the investigation had revealed more. It found evidence suggesting the secret faction, which they termed the Circle of Perfect Surrender, might not have been fully eradicated. References in the documents pointed to sister communities in remote areas of Indiana and Kentucky where their teachings may have persisted. Elder Wright was tasked with preparing a comprehensive confidential report for future leaders, sworn to absolute secrecy. He lived a long life, passing away in 1985, taking the knowledge of the circle with him. The crypt under Harmony Creek remains sealed, its contents a testament to one of the darkest episodes in American communal history. The truth about Sister Agatha Poole and her 5 brethren, along with the other victims of the circle, rests in the society's most secure archives, a burden borne by a select few. Modern Shaker elders occasionally debate revealing the truth, but each generation has concluded the potential harm outweighs the benefit. The victims remain officially listed as pioneers who journeyed west. The Harmony Creek area is now peaceful farmland and quiet homes. Few know their community was once the site where devout souls perished in pursuit of perfect unity. The mystery that began with 5 missing men in a remote Ohio dwelling revealed a conspiracy that challenged the Shaker community's understanding of its past. The choice between truth and protection shaped the society's relationship with its history in ways that endure to this day. The story of Sister Agatha Poole serves as a somber reminder of the catastrophic consequences when pious devotion is warped into a rationale for atrocity, and when the quest for heavenly perfection leads to earthly ruin.